Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipson. Welcome to episode 132 of Sports Management Podcast. Today, I'm delivering some breaking news with today's guest, so stay tuned. If you haven't yet subscribed to this podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening to this, please do so. It's the easiest way to grow the podcast, and the bigger the show, the bigger the guests. Thank you. Now, today's guest is Mario Malavé, the co-founder and co-CEO of Mercury 13. This is announced here on Sports Management Podcast first. Mario has previously founded the company Wagr and became the first company in US history to obtain a sports betting license for a social betting product. Wagr was later acquired by Yahoo Sports, where Mario stayed as VP of betting. Now he is fully focused on Mercury 13 and investments in women's football. Mercury 13 is a multi-club ownership group focused on acquiring, controlling stakes in professional women's football teams in Europe and Latin America. Get ready to learn how Mario co-founded Mercury 13 with Victoire Cogevina, how he and Victoire are splitting the responsibilities as co-CEOs, Mario's favorite quote from Haley Rosen, founder of Just Women's Sports, why women's football is a great investment, how he immigrated to US from Venezuela at age 16, why you don't need a business degree to be successful in business, and much more. Mario Malavé, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you, Marcus. Excited to be here and excited to chat.
Me too. Super excited to talk. There's so many interesting things going on, especially on your end. So you are currently the co-founder and co-CEO of Mercury 13.
That's right.
So can you tell us a little bit about this role and how you met Victoire and started Mercury 13?
Absolutely. Freshly announced. I'm really excited to finally be able to share it publicly. Vic and I have a long and unbiased, but I think a very cool story because we met in 2020, when a mutual friend connected the dots and realized we were both Latin American tech founders living in Miami at the time, who had both been invested by Alexis Ohanian through his fund. It was a new fund at the time, 776. And we had all these commonalities that we didn't know. So someone put us in touch and we arranged a 15-minute coffee that turned into a 2.5-hour conversation, primarily around football. And it was funny. I think right then we both kind of recognized that it wasn't the right time, but that we would one day do something together. And it started this conversation about football very broadly, and men's, women's, the opportunities, what we liked, what we didn't like that was happening in the space. And over the years, that conversation's had like a crescendo. We both were running very committed to startups, very different startups. And the stars kind of aligned. And when the time was right, we both looked at each other figuratively and said, okay, this is it. Like, this is the project we've always wanted to start together. So yeah, we do have a lot of cultural traits and just past experiences that are very remarkably similar, but at the same time, we're very complementary in our skill sets. So I think we're going to make a really good team.
I'm sure. And super exciting. Both of you, as you said, you have many similarities. And if we talk a little bit about your background, leading up to this point, starting, I know that you started early on, like in Goldman Sachs, in investment banker. And then, so how was your journey from being an investment banker, then climbing up and going into tech and where you are now?
Yeah, my first Goldman Sachs was an internship. My first actual job in banking was at Morgan Stanley. I spent 3 years there going through the standard analyst program. The transition, so sports has been a one constant in my life. So my experience in there wasn't sports related. Sports has always been an ongoing presence, especially football, in my life. But Morgan Stanley was really the start of my training as a finance person broadly, but also as a future investor. Learning those basic principles of finance and working in cross-border M&A transaction across the board was very impactful for me. And it's something I didn't study it, so I didn't know much about it until I was on the job learning. But the really pivotal moment is in my third year. I was working in New York, and in the third year, I had an opportunity to move to Menlo Park. And I'm Venezuelan, born and raised. I had immigrated to New York just for college. Up to that point in my life, I had never stepped foot in California. And then all of a sudden I was living in the middle of Silicon Valley, working in pretty much like the cradle of American technology. And it was really, no exaggeration, a life-changing experience because it completely redirected my career path and my life path. I, up until that point, thought I was going to be a career finance person, go back, maybe work in private equity. And when I was there, it was like a completely different world, full of innovation, even a different mental model for entrepreneurship. It was like you would see these companies that entrepreneurs would try wacky things, fail, and they would still be pretty successful, and business models that didn't exist anywhere else. And it just opened up my perspective tremendously. Again, I didn't come from a background where you could be exposed to that type of business or even mindset. And yeah, I had a really cool experience. I worked on a big project, which was the IPO of Snapchat at the time. It was very secret at the time, but I was very lucky and very fortunate to be put in that, what was at the time the biggest assignment for the firm, from the technology group. And once I was exposed to that, I just knew that I had to stay there. So instead of going back to New York and working in private equity, I just decided to redirect things and stay working in tech for a couple more years.
That's really interesting. And also in grad school, you co-founded Wagr. That's how you pronounce it?
Wagr, yeah. We tried to omit the E to make it sound more techy, but yeah, Wagr.
Yeah. So how did that come to life?
Yeah, so I went to business school after 2 years working in venture because I had this inkling and this deep desire to be on the other side of a table. Like being a venture capitalist is a very privileged and fun job. You get to sit down and meet people who are all in on an idea, literally giving their life to the pursuit of one idea. And after you've done that 3, 4, 500 times, I was realizing like, what am I doing on this side? I don't want to be the guy taking notes. Who am I to judge this other startup? Like I have my own ideas, and I felt that I had learned a lot through pattern matching and seeing other people do it right, seeing people do it wrong, to say, I think I could actually give this a go. No one really needs business school. I know it's not a popular thing to say, but you don't need business school to start a company. But it was a very good platform for me to take time to think deeply about what I wanted to start. I went for my MBA in 2018. A year later, sports betting was legalized in the US. In Europe and other parts of the world, it's obviously a very mature market, but in the US, it was still a very nascent opportunity that kind of overnight just opened up. And it was a frenzy. And when it happened, I was still in grad school and I was looking at these trends, realizing, oh my God, this is going to be a gigantic market in the US. My desire to start Wagr, and Wagr was essentially a social sports betting platform. It was a platform and a product that was meant for sports fans who didn't necessarily identify as gamblers, because I fall into that category. I got asked a lot, oh, were you a gambler? And the answer was no. And that's exactly why I wanted to start Wagr, because I'm the type of person who consumes sports 24/7, talks about it with his friends every single day. But I would have never downloaded a casino app and been like, I want to put money at risk. It's just not into my personality. And I saw a lot of people who thought like me. So the idea was, can we build something better that is not predatory, that is meant to be enjoyed with friends? And that was really the genesis of it. So I teamed up with an amazing classmate, Eliana, who we met while pursuing our MBAs, and started the company while we were still students.
That's awesome. And I mean, this grew into a 40 plus people business. And it was also the first company in the US history to obtain a sports betting license for a social betting product.
Yeah, that's right. I think we peaked at around 20 employees, but we definitely hired and cycled through way more than 40 people, as happens often with startups. One of our big achievements that we're very proud of is, because we were pioneers in the space, when we tried to get a license, which you can't operate obviously without the proper license, no one had really been awarded a license to do what we were doing. So we were really trailblazing and proposing a format that is not common in the US. The typical format was the normal, hey, you bet money against the house and the house wants you to lose. So if you lose money, you make the casino more money. And if you win, it's probably not going to last a lot because the casino gets to set the odds. We showed up and we realized, hey, there's a different way, but it's not in any of the laws. So it was a big success for us when we became the first company in US history to get that license to do social peer-to-peer sports betting. So you and I could bet $10 or however much we wanted on any game of our liking in any major sport.
That's a big step, like as we talked about, as it has grown now, sports betting in the US now, and as you said, it's a mature market in other markets. So being the first that's a milestone.
It is. It was a big milestone. It's also, and because I always like to be very open and honest about it, it's also a reminder that just being the first doesn't also guarantee success. Like we were the first to do our format. There are some behemoths in the space. It's a super competitive space here in the US, as it is in other parts of the world, that have really established themselves as massive incumbents. So the business lessons of competing against 1,000-person companies, like gigantic public companies worth billions of dollars, and trying to compete with them with a 10, 15, 20 person team are just incredible. Like probably too many to cite here, but a lot of my conviction for what can be done with limited resources when you have the right people, a creative mindset, and a hardworking ethos came from those experience doing something with such small resources against such big competitors.
I'm sure. And you were able to raise a lot of venture funding as well. And was it in this period that you met Vicky?
Yeah, shortly after. So we raised 16 million in total for that venture. I met Vicky after we raised our seed round, which is the one that 776 co-led, and which is the same fund that invested in her. That was the 4 million round. And right after that's when we connected. And then we raised a $12 million Series A. Betting is a very capital intensive business because of the licensing requirements. So sometimes I feel that raising money is not the right metric. A lot of founders are proud of how much they raise, and I'm very proud of how much we raised because it enabled us to do what we wanted to do. But in and of itself, like it was just a signal that we needed the capital to be able to get the licenses that we needed to operate and provide a lot of the technology and build the technology that we needed in order to materialize the product and put it in the hands of users.
And then in 2023, it was acquired by Yahoo. So how was this process?
Yeah, that's right. In April 2023, we were acquired by Yahoo Sports. It was a relatively quick process. I mean, Yahoo Sports is the second largest sports platform in the US. It's an absolute force in the sports world. Like any American fan recognizes the brand, the name, and most of them consume sports through one of their properties. So it was really a good marriage of both cultures, of strengths, of what we brought to the table, and giving Yahoo a lot of tools and capacities and capabilities, and especially team, just in how we approach social gaming more broadly. So it wasn't just about betting, it was about the mindset that we brought to how we had all these unique insights into how people want to consume sports and sports bets adjacent to their social circle and share it with friends. And we understood that betting on sports didn't have to be an isolating solitary experience. That could actually be much more something that involved others. And that blended really, really well with the way that Yahoo Sports approaches their product building across all of their different fantasy products, non-fantasy products, news. So it was a good process. Both companies were private, obviously. So it was a private transaction that was pretty seamless. And the team there is fantastic. Like Yahoo's in the middle of a very exciting turnaround. I will let them comment on that story and what they're doing. Obviously, it's not my place, but it is very special what's happening there. And I wouldn't be surprised to see them reemerge as a public company in the near future.
You stayed as VP of sports betting at Yahoo. It's common when you have an acquisition to stay in the company for a while. So you were the youngest VP at the time in the company at that point, right?
That's my thing. I actually don't know because I haven't checked all the other VPs' ages, but it felt like that definitely at times, which was a humbling but also exciting experience. There's just tremendous talent in the Yahoo executive team, both senior and juniors. But yeah, I did stay. I oversaw the entire transition of the team. As you said, it is very customary across these transactions, make sure all of our people adapted and were settled internally. And I oversaw and was there for slightly over 6 months through that transition period, working very closely with the Yahoo Sports leadership.
So now let's dig into Mercury 13. You will be co-CEO with Vicky. So how you said that you have similar backgrounds. So how will you complete each other, and what different responsibilities will you have?
Yeah, similar backgrounds, but very complementary and very different skill set. So it's funny. I'll give a little bit more of perspective here. I have always been skeptical of co-CEO. Truly, as an investor, when people would say co-CEO, I'd always kind of like hesitate and say, "Is that really doable? Like, who's actually making the decisions here?" And in the inside, my perspective has changed and morphed over time, mostly through seeing successful case studies of other startups and other leaders do it and split leadership. The two things that I think are very important for this to work, and I'll go into how we're splitting duties, is number one, you always have to be nurturing that relationship. Like it requires a bit more care if you're going to split leadership, because there will inevitably be decisions where you will disagree. And it's very important that to not slow down progress of the company, you need to learn to disagree and commit very quickly and efficiently. And that requires clear communication, vulnerability, trust. So Vicky and I put a lot of time and effort, honestly, into making sure that our connection as co-leaders is always to be strong, because if it's not strong or if it gets degraded, then the company's progress can suffer. The second part is that you really need clear swimming lanes or clear areas of focus. And this is where like that complementarity that I mentioned really comes to shine, because the things that excite me and energize me on a day-to-day basis are the complete almost opposite of the ones that energize and excite Victoire. So we both feel that we're executing our competitive advantage. The areas that I will have oversight for are primarily everything related to our investment capacity. So I come from an investment background. So how we're going to deploy our funds, how we're going to build a portfolio, how we're going to execute value, diligence, close transactions, that's all in my domain. All the operating piece of like, how do we actually accrue value across the portfolio and help run it efficiently? And how do we build our teams? And how do we embed ourselves into the clubs that we acquire? And then the third piece is oversight. I'm obviously not doing this myself personally, but I have oversight over our football operations. So we built a fantastic team with some people who are way more knowledgeable and experienced than I am on the football operations piece. How do we embed into the teams to help make sure that we're driving success on the pitch, not only off of it? On the other side, Victoire is fully responsible for everything related to our commercial operations, because football entities are really cultural assets, if you think about it, right? The way that you drive value to these assets can be slightly different than a traditional business. And they need to be culturally relevant. They need to tell stories. They need to build great brands. They need to attract sponsors and want people to be associated with the team, the fans, the sponsors, the players, the staff, everything around it, even the communities that geographically surround the teams. So everything that's related to brand, community, commercial operation, or marketing is being run by Victoire. So there's obviously a lot of points of interconnection where we need to stay closely aligned, and we are very closely aligned, but that's at a high level how we've structured this.
Yeah, that's incredibly interesting. And I don't know, we haven't mentioned it yet, but just to make sure that Mercury 13 is a multi-club ownership group focused on acquiring, controlling stakes in professional women's football teams. And I read that you're focusing on Europe and Latin America first, and maybe not North America. So what are the thoughts on where to target and what type of clubs to target?
Yeah, that's all correct. We are trying to build the leading network of multi-clubs. We're very focused solely on women's football. Our decision to focus on Europe is mainly because we see the risk-reward dynamics more favorable there today. And I want to be careful to say that doesn't mean that could change in the future. Just like any investor, we have to be constantly assessing the market. So it's not like it's part of our mission to only do Europe or only do Latin America. We'll go wherever we think the opportunity is in terms of favorable, like places where we can exert the change that we want to exert. I think of all the different leagues and geographies in terms of state, like where are they in their development journey? And I would say it's no secret, like the NWSL here in the US is one of the most mature women's leagues, if not the most mature. I think the WSL is up there. Champions League is obviously a pan-regional tournament, so it's not equally comparable. But they're leading the way. The valuations here reflect that already. If you just look at the rise in the expansion fees really quickly from 2 million to 5 million to 53. And it feels, to those who weren't paying close attention, it feels like that just happened overnight. Like, what the hell? How do teams now going 50? I'm assuming the next NWSL expansion is going to go for more than 53. So the trajectory, if you plot the 5-6 year development, is like almost a straight line up. That hasn't happened in Europe yet. People have different opinions. Some people think it will, some people think it won't. But when we look at opportunities in Europe, we see this rich, rich heritage of football. Obviously, it's the cradle of football world is like in Europe. All the historical leagues, the most important athletes, traditionally in the men's side, the teams with the most brand recognition are all there. And you see like people who already love football. You see governments that are very passionate now of catching up to the US, who historically had just run away with a lot of World Cup titles. And now that very quickly changed. I think the last World Cup is a testament to that. So we see all the right ingredients brewing to give rise to many more competitive leagues. And it's just really exciting. So we're super focused on Europe right now, trying to move fast because we see that window of the current valuations could close very quickly, and we don't want it to close on us too fast. But after that, It could be LATAM is the next frontier. I think it still has there needs a little bit more development to happen. But there are some exciting case studies there. Obviously, what's happening in Mexico is worth pointing out because there's just been a quick rise in women's football that I think no one there, even on the men's side, expected this to happen. And that is going to continue evolving. So we're always reassessing markets, but Europe and then LATAM are the current priorities at the moment.
Interesting. When you're doing the due diligence for the clubs and choosing which ones to invest to, can you mention which ones are on the radar right now, or what are some things you're looking for in a club before investing?
Yeah, I definitely don't want to list more competition and tell you who we're looking at, but I can absolutely speak to the investment pillars that we follow. And at a high level, the way that we think about, hey, okay, what is the right club for us and how do we rank and value these clubs? It's very tailored to our model and what we think we bring to the table. So one thing we look for a lot is commercial potential. It's very important to us that the club has the right ingredients to sustain a brand and a commerciality that has a high ceiling, right? And that is in itself dictated by the club's location, its history, the community surrounding it. Are there any things that we need to know? So a club in a big football market in a key city that has a lot of football fans around it will be much more valuable to us than a club that maybe doesn't have that rich history and is in a remote location with not a lot of people around it, all else equal. Financial sustainability or proof thereof is very important. There's not a lot of team, like football is marred with case studies of very quick, like rising stars that then crumble down, right? Because of unsustainable spending. And it's a story that fans have even come to despise. The owner comes in, spends a ton of money, it feels great for a minute, and then everything collapses. And the community surrounding the clubs end up bearing the responsibility for it, or the aftermath, sorry. We don't want that to happen. So we really look for clubs that have shown and demonstrated a track record of trying to do a lot with a little, which is sadly the reality of women's football today. And it's very exciting to see that changing. We obviously wish it was changing faster. But when you see these clubs that are working with tiny, tiny budgets and you see everything they try to provide the players and they try to structure things to just keep the club going under very difficult capital conditions, there are some very strong management teams that have emerged in the space because of that. So that's the second thing. League dynamics are super important. Every league is different. So you want to invest in leagues that have growth potential where everyone's incentivized to grow the league, grow the pie. So the right team in the wrong league could still not be a good investment. Football operations, especially with an eye towards infrastructure. We understand like some of these clubs, we want to make sure that we're going to come in with fresh ideas, a new mindset, inject more capital into the business. It's important for us to know that the infrastructure that's there can sustain a certain level of play. So that's really key. And the last piece I would say is the adjacent community to the club, because as a cultural, going back to my point about cultural assets, it's important that the surrounding community is embracing the club and that the club is an important piece of that community. So yeah, that's just that's a summary of the things that we rank, and it's always a trade-off, right? Like if we find a unicorn that scores highly on all pillars, like trust me, we're going to go at it. But often you need to decide like which ones are you willing to trade off for the right club.
I think you said that women's football is not just an exciting business opportunity, it's also an incredibly powerful gender equality movement. And when I have talked a lot about this on the podcast before, we have talked about the importance of male allies. So in your case, to choose to co-found Mercury 13 and focus solely on women's football, is it a 50-50 business opportunity or equality movement, or, is it more business, or why are you so strongly thinking like this is what you want to do?
Yeah, I'm going to quote Alexis here, Ohanian, who's obviously been a great inspiration to both me and Victoire, and say it's both. And like he, for the longest time, has been, you see a lot of similar arguments being made for diversity plainly. And like someone Latin who grew up in the US hearing these arguments, I would always not get angry, but get upset that people always try to attack it from like the do what's right angle. And you hear less voices say, and that's changed, obviously, do it because it's good for business, right? So hiring, like it's known now, like hiring a diverse team is good for business. It's not just that yes, it is also the morally, ethically right thing to do. But more importantly, like you can outperform with a more diverse array of perspectives, and having a homogenous team with a single viewpoint is not going to outperform anyone, right? That's well established. It's a bit of a similar dynamic here where it is full of opportunity. I think the case for women's sports, and there's a great quote that I love, and I quote it a lot, from Haley Rosen, who's the founder of Just Women's Sports, and it's pinned at the top of her Twitter. It's like, there's a double standard that men are always judged on potential and women are judged on production when it comes to sports. And when we look at women's football, and you could say the same thing about women's sports, the potential is incredible. And just if I only put my investor hat on, that's incredibly exciting. Now, as you said it, and Victoire says this a lot, there's a very important and very powerful gender equality movement embedded in women's football. Like women's football, we see it as a vehicle that carries that movement. And that to us is a byproduct of us doing our job correctly. Like our goal is that if we can prove that these teams not just can get by, but can actually become very sustainable, very lucrative businesses, that's only going to help advance gender equality across the board. So I always am adamant and unapologetic that we're not an NGO, we're not a charity, we're not looking for people to make donations to Mercury 13. We are a for-profit, the multi-club ownership group that is trying to prove that this is amazing business. And I think the smartest people in the world have already woken up to this opportunity. I think by the day, more people are starting to realize it. So, of course, I'm biased. I'm fully devoted and fully committed to this space. But I think over time, you're going to see that go from non-mainstream view to more than mainstream view. And arguably, it already is starting to happen or has already happened in some pockets of the world.
Yeah. And I think in my personal opinion, I think that we talked about before how fast women's football has grown and women's sports in general, but specifically football lately. And in my opinion, is that from the beginning, you took whatever worked for men's football and made like a copy paste. And now it feels like, I say we have realized that women's football is a different product than the men's football. And you're making something unique for that and tailoring to women's football, and that's when I see like you can seeing it bloom.
Completely. And I hate when, and this is mostly driven by public perception, but the things that men's football did should never limit or constrain what women's football as a movement can do. And obviously there's many actors in any sport, including women's football, but it is this cool opportunity to be innovative and disruptive. And I know those are buzzwords that people love to say to generate hype, but there really is an opportunity of blank canvas to not just, as you just said, copy paste, but actually challenge ourselves and say, where can we thoughtfully deviate? And there are definitely things you want to copy the good things, but like, yes, the ball should be round and it should be 11 players on each team. Like you don't want to reinvent the rules and be like, challenge everything. But there are so many ways in which you're already seeing the game be different. The storytelling, the media reporting around it, right? It's predominantly digital and it feels relevant and culturally edgy. And it's just a very different fandom and attachment to the game that is still the same sport. So that's one of our key pillars on operating, not on the investment side, is like challenge ourselves, not just copy paste the best practices. And that's easy. That's table stakes. But like, how do we actually innovate and think, what can we do differently? How can we rethink and challenge conventional assumptions about what a team is? Even putting gender aside, just it is a blank slate opportunity to a totally new market. And that in and of itself is a very, very cool opportunity that you rarely get in sports. So it's part of what has us so energized. And we need to prove it, obviously. I always joke we're still a multi-club ownership group without a club, which is not a state we want to stay in for very long. But we're excited about the chance to prove it. And hopefully you'll be hearing more from us on how we've innovated and done things a little bit differently.
I'm sure. So hopefully in 2024 now will be the first signed club then.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm working hard to do that. I don't want to jinx anything, but we're hoping in the next few months we can share with the world and close on our first asset. And hopefully then at that point we'll be club owners. And then it's on us to go to a second team and a third team to become multi-club owners. So there's still a couple steps we need to start delivering on our mission, but we're very committed to it and honestly been working super hard quietly to get there.
Yeah. Both you and Vicky are very young and has accomplished a lot in terms of specifically in business, started and sold companies and now you being VP, being co-CEO. I see the passion and the drive that you have, like when we're talking now. Where do you think that this type of work ethic and drive, where does that come from for you?
Well, I appreciate it. I'll speak very personally, and you should ask Vicky. I know she's already been on the pod, so maybe one day in the future. There's obviously endogenous factors to my upbringing, personality, like things that are unique to all of us as individuals that drive that. But I would say on the more exogenous parts, the part about like my upbringing or factors that influence that mindset, for me, a big part of that, which is a core part of my identity, is just being an immigrant. Not just the identity of being an immigrant, but the experience of being an immigrant. I always tell people openly, especially when I speak to other immigrants who are now like younger than me and trying to go through the same motions. When I moved to New York, I was 16 years old. I had just left Venezuela. I had like moved to probably one of the most intimidating cities in the world. And I wasn't scared. I was just grateful to have the opportunity, right? Like it's sometimes, especially people here in the US ask me a lot, that must have been really hard. How did you cope? And I was like, how did I cope? I was just grateful. I knew that people in Venezuela didn't get chances to go attend university in New York. And I was just always committing to maximizing the opportunity that I was being given. So that hunger to like, how can I make the best out of that experience? I've just carried with me through all my entire life. And that was first, how can I get the best grades? How can I place the best bank? How can I get the best placement in an investment firm? How can I go to the best MBA school? Now it's like, and at some point, like, and get the best investors and like, and just like do things. And I think later in life, after you start wearing yourself down, it starts to become a more personal journey of like, you start seeking impacts and not just validation. So I think there's very much a pivotal point, which has absolutely happened for me. I would even dare to say it's also happened for Vicky, where, okay, we started the companies, we did all those things, we proved to ourselves that we could do it. Now, what do we want to do? Like, what's the thing that brings us joy? What are the things that the world needs that we're good at? And where do all of those Venn diagrams overlap? And that was kind of the genesis for Mercury. We looked at each other and we were like, we got to actually do something really special here. We think we have the right skills. It's the right time. And it's very good. It's going to be great for the world. So yeah, that's, I would say a lot of that just traces back to something as simple as like picking up your life and starting it fresh in a different world and a different culture.
At 16 years old, making this move to the US, why US? Why this move? How did you take the courage to do this?
Well, a little bit of a backstory is Venezuela, my home country, where I grew up, sadly has given the world many, many immigrants. I think it's well over 5 million these days. And mostly because of steep and continuous decline in living conditions. Just a lot of people have had to seek a better life elsewhere. I was amongst the earlier wave of people who left. I think today, many more people have left. In 2009, when I first moved, I was definitely, most of my friends were not immediately moving, although many of them were. And it was just that. It was trying to find a better life. The country was very unsafe. Crime rates and homicide rates were very high at the time. And I remember my parents looking at me, and I had every intention of going to university in Venezuela, staying there. And at one point, even at my young age, and I was a teenager, I even could pick up and recognize by the things that were happening in the country at that time: hyperinflation, again, sky high crime rates, deterioration across infrastructure, public services, education. I was looking around and saying, oh, this sucks, but this is not the place where I'm going to like become my best self and go try to achieve my dreams. So I didn't have the luxury of visiting schools, as many people here do, and tour different colleges. My mom said, we have money for 5 applications, pick your 5 universities carefully. I sent in the applications, took the SAT, and landed in New York, which again ended up completely transforming my life. And I'm very grateful for it. But there was a little bit of randomness and luck involved with it.
I understand. But still a courageous move. And as you said, like to focus on the determination and wanting to have better opportunities for yourself.
Yeah. And also and this is a very stoic thing. I actually, funny enough, wrote my admissions essay to Harvard on this, about learning to surrender to things beyond our control. So for me, immigrating was not under my control fully. It wasn't a decision I made. It was more of a reaction to something that happened in my life that I couldn't control, that my country was in a bad trajectory. And a lot of us get stuck for a long time because of things that we can't control. So again, it was a very stoic principle to realize, well, I didn't have this in my bingo card for 2009 at the time, but here I am. And the only thing I can control is what I make of the opportunity. And once you make that mental switch, then it's a completely change in perspective. And it was fun and playful. And it was just like almost a challenge to start fresh somewhere else and learn a new culture and reinvent myself. Like there are cool things that come with it. But you first have to get over that mental hump of that something happened to me that I didn't necessarily want it to happen.
Yeah. And it was funny, you mentioned before that maybe you don't need a business degree, but still, you graduated from NYU, you went to Harvard Business School, and during that, starting your own company. So, you are really kept busy.
Yeah, I guess you're easy. Well, but It's funny because you might look at me and say, well, easy to say it for you. But it's also the people who are on the inside who've lived through it who could tell you, I, having worked with many successful entrepreneurs before, I could tell you there's not a single thing that gives you that is necessary. Is it helpful? Absolutely. But is it necessary? Like, no. And I'm very unapologetic about that, even if the Harvard admissions office won't like it. But any founders come from all places, and all from all various backgrounds. So I just want to make sure people know and hear that it's never a gatekeeping item. Like you don't really need it. It can be helpful, but it's not necessary.
I read that Pep Guardiola is someone that inspires you.
I don't know where you read that, but no, he is. He is. I just sound like, how do you know that? Yes, that's right.
So what is it about him that inspires you?
I think the combination of creativity, and I'm a big Barcelona fan, so I'll just no surprise, but I'll just put it out there. It's the combination of creativity with an insane hardworking ethos, right? Like when people look at his trajectory, and he succeeded everywhere, but he succeeded on his own terms. But he works very hard to achieve that because I think our culture sometimes aggrandizes too much people who are just creative geniuses, but that sometimes has more luck than just like or they don't realize the hard work that goes behind it. And I think Pep as a coach has always been the embodiment of someone who sets very high standards, produces beautiful football on the field, right? It just has captivated an entire generation of football fans. Even if you hate the guy, even if you're a Manchester United guy, you kind of begrudgingly admit he's really good. But then you hear the player perspective and you realize that in order to be that good, he works insanely hard to the point where he even questions, like, is it too hard? Does he burn himself out? Does he burn players out? He's had to cycle through teams. He's had to cycle through players. But setting that standard of excellence has always been really inspiring to me. And I mean, I think his football genius is unparalleled, but it's someone who, from a leadership perspective, I take a lot of inspiration from.
And the creativity and hard work, as you mentioned, is that something that you can channel into the business world for yourself?
Completely. And I would say every startup founder should channel them because when you're in a startup mode, which Mercury 13 very much is a startup in the sense that it's a new idea with novel concepts, by definition, you're not going to beat the competition by having more capital, right? Like that's what incumbents do. Like, there's a lot of successful stories that have happened in the world of business that have been transformed through a lot of money. Well, that's not the position we're in. We definitely have money and we want to invest it, but we're not going to win by outspending everyone else. So it kind of forces you like, well, what can we control? And it's even a nice tie to what a comment I was making before about stoicism. Like, what is in our control? How hard do we work and how creative we are with our approach? So when we think about how can we achieve our results as Mercury, it's by doing things that others haven't, by being super creative, by working harder than anyone else who's trying to do the same thing that we are. And we try to embody those principles day in and day out within the company, with the people we hire, and soon, hopefully, with the clubs that we'll acquire as well.
How would you define success?
I think it's the confluence of a couple things at the very basic level. So I'll tell you what success is for the company, and then I'll tell you what it means for us more personally. I think at a very basic level for the company, it's we generated a positive return for our investors that was commensurate to the risk that they took. We transformed the clubs that we acquired for the better. And in doing so, we raised the standards for what women footballers could and should expect from the clubs they play for. If those three things happen, I would say Mercury 13 was successful in its mission. Now, the part that's a little bit more personal, which goes back to the gender equality movement, is we want to project and become, and it's an ambitious task. We have to prove it, so we haven't done it yet. But we want to become a successful case study for what a diverse and equal leadership team can achieve in a space. And with that, advance the movement and the case for gender equality, right? Like ultimately, the ultimate form of equality is true equality. And Victoire and I are both very proud to not just see myself as an ally, which I very much I am, but also as co-leaders of saying like, hey, we want to show to the world that like we can team up and do something fantastic without it mattering like what genders who or who did what. It's just like diverse teams excelling, I think will be a fantastic proof that they can outperform. And we deeply believe that. But again, I want to prove it out. So those are like the success factors for the company. But us, we have that extra chip on our shoulder that we would love to humbly become that case study that others can point to and say like, well, if they did it, so can we, or maybe rethink how leadership teams could or should look like.
Interesting. Something I always ask is, has there been any bumps on the road in your career? And if so, how did you overcome them?
Always. I would say there's many, many bumps. And it's funny because when you learn to not get too hung up on them, they never seem like bumps in hindsight. But at the moment, they were definitely, definitely bumps. When I first wanted to redirect my career and stay in Silicon Valley, I essentially had to struggle and go through a period of not making a difficult decision to not pursue an opportunity that I had in a different industry. And like, I remember at that time, it felt like I was throwing away what I had spent years building. Like the mecca for most bankers is to go to private equity. And it seems so trivial and privileged when you say it out loud now, because it's like, well, I did well. I was okay. But at the time, it really felt like I was throwing away everything I had built for. And it just so worked out that, it really wasn't. Like I just wanted to make a change. And sometimes changes come with a little bit of friction. A similar story is like, I remember when I was at Harvard, I had made it my mission to work in football because I wanted to start building that professional skill set from the club space, from the sporting director like perspective. And I was this close to working with AC Milan, actually. I had like almost like I was on the verge of being an intern there and spending the summer with the sporting director. I was really excited. And then it was the year, I think it was 2019, where they didn't make the Champions League. And that obviously means different budget. They called me and said, sorry, we're not going to be able to do it. And I was crushed. I was like, oh, I even accepted a job in a venture capital firm. Well, long story short, right before the summer started, I got a last minute offer from LAFC, which ended up becoming a blessing in disguise. The best thing that ever happened to me, because LAFC is the ultimate case study, in my opinion, in men's football for how to start a club from scratch. In 5 years, they became the most successful, most valuable club in MLS. They are bar none. They play beautiful football. They have rewritten all the rules. And having the privilege of being a fly on the wall in that dressing room, day in, day out at training, working with what, in my opinion, is the best sporting director in MLS, was ultimately the privilege of a lifetime. And I've learned so much and a lot of lessons that I'm now applying to Mercury 13. So again, like all of these setbacks and bumps in the road, if you're patient enough, in hindsight, can actually not be a setback at all, even if it feels very difficult at the moment.
It reminds me of a quote to say you can only connect the dots looking backwards. So in this case, as you said, like
exactly right.
When you're in it, it might seem like a bump, but then going forward, it led you to the path that you're on.
Exactly right. You just have to hang on there and be patient enough so that wait until the upside reveals itself, which sometimes it takes easier said than done, right? When you're in the moment, it's always not so straightforward.
Of course. Is there something I haven't mentioned yet that you feel is important?
I think that not really. There's one thing I would add is we're going to need a lot of partner to achieve what we want to achieve. And I say partner in the true sense, in a very broad sense of the word. Like in order to transform these clubs, it's not something that we can just unilaterally do. We need investors, commercial sponsors who want to get involved with the story, like forward-thinking staff and people who want to come join these clubs and transform them with us. So I guess it's just an open call, an open invite that if you're hearing this and you're inspired or curious even about what we're doing and what we're pursuing, please drop us a line. We would love to chat. Founders at mercury13.com. It'll reach both me and Vic. But this is really a movement. And although we are competitive insofar as, yes, we want to buy the best clubs and we want to compete with others to get them, we're very much allies and friends when it comes to raising the rising tide lifts all boats, and like just raising the stakes and helping the leagues grow. So if there's anything that we can ever do to propel this movement forward in the sport, we're going to need all the help we can get, and we want to give all the help that we can give.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So is there you mentioned the email there, but is there like a website or something that if the listeners want to read and learn some more?
Absolutely. You can follow us on socials, me and Victoire, but mercury13.com, or find us on LinkedIn. We try to be very public with what we're doing, again, just to try to propel momentum and awareness. So if you want to follow along the journey, we'd be honored. And if you ever want to chat, just drop us a line, founders@mercury13.com, and we'll do our best to get back to you very quickly.
Perfect. Before I let you go, the last question that I ask everyone is, who from your network do you think would be a good future guest on this podcast?
I think you should talk to my friend Mihir, who runs a company called Lifelike that builds a lot of very cool engagement tools for teams in the sports space. And in a world where attention is shifting to digital channels and teams are realizing that they need to become tech savvy for fans, it's already happening on pitch. I think what he's doing is really cool. So I'm happy to put in a good word and refer you there if you want to.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Mario, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Sports Management Podcast, and I can't wait to follow the Mercury 13 journey.
Thank you very much, Marcus. Likewise, and hopefully we'll have a chance to chat again in the future.
Thank you for listening to the Sports Management Podcast. Please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any upcoming episodes. Also, feel free to leave a comment about what you thought about this episode. If you want to get in contact with me, send an email to sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or hit me up on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @sportsmpodcast.